Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Astrid, for the lovely introduction. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thanks for arriving on time back from lunch break. My name is Linda Keller. For the next 45 minutes, I'm going to talk about TABE and recertification here in Minnesota. If you are brand new to TABE, this is not the session for you. There will be a session offered on August 27th from 1 to 4 virtually. But if you are here to be recertified because you haven't had any TABE training in the last 5 years, you are in the right location. My email address is listed on here. And if you have questions after today's session, please feel free to contact me. I'm going to turn off my video now, so to save on bandwidth, and then we'll just get moving here. So everyone who is here today, I need you to, in the chat, put your full name, your first and last name, the agency or the program that you're currently working with, your current role in ABE in your agency that you're working with, and then your work email address as well. The training team does need to verify who attended today's training. So please make sure you add that information into the chat. Thank you. And we do like to find out who is attending today's session. So we're going to go with me first, introducing myself. Again, my name is Linda Keller. Primary role is with Metro North Adult Basic Education that serves 8 school districts in the northern part of the metro area. I've been in adult ed since the 90s, which kind of dates me, but I've been in support staff roles my entire career, which is going on 29 years with adult ed. I'm not a licensed teacher, but I do want to find out who is attending today's session because there's folks are in lots of different roles. And it's always interesting to know who's attending today's session. So if you could put in the next slide. Actually, we need to go back to this slide. So looking for years of experience in TABE, are you 1 to 5 years? Are you 5+ years? Or are you 10+ years? We know there's just folks all over, and there's a lot of names I recognize in the chat as people were logging in. So there's always new information added to TABE and CASA's recertification trainings based on the latest info that the assessment team members are learning from the publishers. So, oh, we've got another 20+ years. Awesome. Okay. So today's objectives are, we're going to talk about the information and just review information on 11-12. And there is some new information regarding 13 and 14 approval. We do not have any additional slides, but there was information provided to us from the publishers. So we did add that additional information. We're going to talk about and review best practices in administering assessments. We're going to talk about the tools available to allow us to target the instruction and then to encourage student learning and increase their gains. And then the training today also will meet your ABE every 5 years test administration recertification requirement. In the link here on this slide, there is a link to lots of training materials that are in here. It'll also be shared at the end. The information has also been added to the session in your schedule app that you have. So as well as today's the PDF of today's presentation as well. So let's talk about why do we administer assessments in Minnesota Adult Basic Ed. There's a lot of different reasons, but here's some of the basics. We need to find out basic information about students' functioning life skills in reading, math, and language. Some agencies establish and use assessments for class placement into specific subject areas that they're teaching. Assessments provide guidance to teachers that help each student's instructional needs. We also do it because we need to establish an NRS or National Reporting System level or a baseline for post-testing students. And then another reason for testing is once post-testing is completed, the results from any post-testing done will help provide teachers with information about whether or not their instruction was effective. So, and a big reason is accountability. We need to all be accountable for the instruction that we're delivering so we can continue to get funding, and we need to work together as a state in order to meet the targets that we have with the federal government. So who's eligible to administer assessments? Any staff who's gone through a TABE implementation training in Minnesota with a certified trainer, or staff who've completed an appropriate TABE certification training found at tabetest.gov site. This was a self-paced training that you can do. And then any staff who have completed their every 5 years recertification training. So you can meet any one of those 3 criteria in order to deliver TABE tests. TABE's actually been around for quite some time. In the PDF, there's a link to a TABE history for those of you that like visuals, but believe it or not, they started out with a version 1 and 2 back in '67. About 8 to 10 years later, they had a version 3, 4. In the mid 80s, there was version 5, 6. In the 90s, there was 7, 8, which is when I started seeing the term TABE. In 9, 10, there was they came out in 2003 after the 2002 GED test series came out. TABE Online was launched in 2006, not widely used here in Minnesota until probably five or 6 years ago. And then TABE 11 and 12 was approved, NRS approved in 2017, and that is currently approved through next June. TABE 13 and 14, the newest version, was approved by the National Reporting System for reporting for 3 years. So that will be approved through June of 2027. Any questions about any of that information, you can contact Michelle Wasowski, who is our rep for DRC, for more information. So who should be given a TABE 11 or 12 test? Learners who are enrolling into adult ed programs that are funded by WIOA. Any clients interested in workforce center specialized trainings to determine whether or not they're eligible. Individuals interested in earning their high school equivalency. Learners who could be enrolling into college course or courses. And then any English language learners who scored 236 on ACASIS, and I forgot to correct that language. I so apologize. It should say STEPS test, and it should have the new range for the STEP test. So, but clients that are housed in corrections for adult ed program placement are using TABE also. So there's other tools that Data Recognition Corporation has for use with TABE, but there's one for writing. These tests are not approved here in Minnesota for NRS reporting purposes, but you can use them with GED prep learners. They were released in February of 2021. And as of August of this year, they're not approved for reporting, and they're only available with computer-based testing. There's also a test called Class E, which some of you may have heard of. Its intended uses with ELL learners, and it was released in 2007. The AB forms were NRS approved through June of this year, and the CD forms are the newest version, and those were approved by the feds for NRS reporting in May of 2027. They're not NRS approved for reporting purposes in Minnesota at this time. So there's all kinds of resources available on tabetest.com. Has all kinds of information out there for you. So TABE 11-12, currently approved in Minnesota until June of 2025 in 3 different subject areas. Can be used in reading, language, and math. Each of these test levels was designed to measure different grade level content ranges, and those ranges are shown here. The L level generally covers almost up to 2nd grade. The E level covers 2 grade ranges. M, same thing. D level covers up to 3 grade ranges, and then the A level, which is advanced, covers like 4+ grade ranges. Any questions about that? So what do we know about TABE assessments? We know that they measure academic skills in context of life and work scenarios. We know you can administer them to a group, or you can do it individually. You can test students individually. It's practical for large or small groups. There are sample test items for TABE for test prep, all available at no cost to the tabetest.com site. If you do paper pencil and you use booklets, they're cost effective. If you do online testing, which is computer delivered and potentially remote delivered, it improves the quality of assessment and does reduce some staff time. Affordable, they generally run $3.50 to $4.30 per test per subject. The more you buy, the more you save. If there are agencies that are interested in getting free TABE online tests for your program, reach out to Marty Olson at her email, because there were tests that were purchased with excess grant funds last year, and they are sitting in an account to distribute to programs here in Minnesota if you're interested. And in the spring of 2022, many folks who were TABE users, they received an email indicating that any online tests that were purchased would expire 1 year after the date of purchase. The policy, this was news to many folks, but the information that was received from DRC was that it had been a policy pre-COVID. They let the policy lapse during COVID to give folks additional time to use up the tests after everybody returned and was doing in-person programming again. However, there were many folks in Minnesota that were not using TABE online yet when that happened. So it was different news than what we had heard in the past. But if you're considering using TABE online whatsoever in the future, you just need to make sure that you consider your annual program use when you're making future purchases. So if you're only testing and reading in your program, think about how often you are post-testing individuals in reading. If you're testing in 3 different subject areas, you need to take that into consideration, and how frequent you're doing post-testing when making future purchases. So, all right, so what does standardized testing mean? We know TABE is standardized as our CASAS, but what does it mean? It means that the test is always administered and scored in the same way for every student, regardless of whatever agency that they are tested in. So the proper timing always needs to be used. You need to be reading the script that is provided by the publishers. You can assist students with demographics if they should need to be assisted. Practice questions, it's okay to go over with them, as well as in the paper pencil and the computer-based versions, but don't review the test questions themselves before beginning the testing session whatsoever. Students cannot use cell phones, translators, or dictionaries. And then this is something that folks need to be mindful of also, is don't allow breaks in the middle of a testing session itself. Students are allowed to take a break between parts 1 and 2 of reading or math. The language is not divided into 2 parts, but students should always, they need to finish the part that they are on before they end a test session. And then you shouldn't review correct test answers with examinees after that, but there are diagnostics that are available in both paper pencil format and then in DRC if you're doing TABE online testing and computer-based testing. So the slides shown here, there's a link in the resources that are provided, but these are the maximum allowable testing times for each subject with TABE, as well as in the locator. When TABE 1112 was initially approved by the NRS, the times were much longer, but as data started to come in and online testing was done, DRC resubmitted the maximum allowable time to the National Department of Ed office in order to have times updated. And these are the maximum allowable. Most folks are not taking as long to finish each section, but the next slide does show the average length of time that it is taking folks to complete different portions and different levels of TABE. And all of this data that is in this slide is from computer-based testing data that DRC provided folks with. So if your agency is doing paper pencil testing, these are all different materials that each examiner needs, each examinee needs. Each examiner needs test directions, they need to test booklets, and they need an answer key. And then each test taker will need a book, potentially need different levels of books. If you are testing in multiple subject areas, they may need different levels of answer documents. And there are answer documents that can be purchased from DRC, or they could be agency created. There's some resources out on the Minnesota ABE assessment.com site of different agencies here in Minnesota who have shared agency created answer documents if you didn't want to purchase the product from DRC. Something that was shared with regard to the 13-14 tests is that the new answer sheets are going to be universal, which means that you can use them on every level of TABE. We have not seen a preview of that, but that's what we were told by the DRC rep, that they are universal. And so folks don't need to purchase all of the different testing levels like they did with 11-12. These are just the other items that if you're doing paper pencil testing, students also need pencils. You're going to need scratch paper for math. Rulers are distributed for the level E form 12. Protractors for math are only allowed during the level M only. And then there's basic 4-function calculators for math. And that is only for part 2 of level M. Dollar Store has the basic 4-function calculators, and you can use those. Scientific calculators are available for math part 2 levels D and A. What we have been told by the DRC reps also with 13-14 that the level A math test is going to be 100% calculator allowable. Yeah, so let's go to the next slide here. With TABE 9 and 10, there was the option of scanning and scoring. DRC purchased answer sheets through a scanner. There was software that was needed, and it was quite expensive. There were not many programs using it here in Minnesota. I only knew of one. However, with 11-12, they've changed that so that there is no, it was all web-based, the scanning and scoring. There's no TestMate software that was required. And then if folks wanted to do paper pencil testing, they could purchase a scanner, they would purchase the DRC answer sheets, and then they would use the scanner to score. All of that information is located. There's links for the scanners that can be purchased in the links for material. So, when interpreting scaled scores, there's a document that, again, that's shared in the links, but it's a best practice guideline of how to interpret scores. With 11-12, when searching for scaled scores in the guide, users will notice a plus or a minus sign in the scaled score charts. Those symbols indicate whether the scaled score is outside the range content of how the test was designed. So when the scaled score is assigned and the scaled score falls in the plus or the minus range, that score is valid. However, programs should consider using the next highest level of the test in that subject on a post-test whenever the pre-test score falls into the plus range. The reason for that is because a learner is not going to be able to make a level gain or an MSG when their scaled score cannot get any higher in that level of test or in that subject. Yeah, this document is shared in the materials links. We've been told with TABE 1314 that there will no longer be a plus and minus signs to show when tests are outside of the content ranges on the low or the high end. But again, because we've not seen any of the materials, we don't know what that looks like. But when we do learn that information, and that information is posted to the tabetest.com site, we will be sure to share that, and maybe a newsletter article, the ones that come out from MDE. So just watch for those newsletter articles too. So, all right. So if your agency is hand scoring TABE or the paper pencil test scores, you'll know that there's a learning curve that goes along with hand scoring. You'll also know that with reading questions, there's two-part questions, and based on whichever question individuals get right, they could potentially get 0, 1, or 2 points for the total question. We also know that there were field test questions that were embedded into the paper pencil booklets. Those field test questions have no value, and you can't use the field test questions when determining what the entire scaled score is. So you just need to be mindful with when you're scoring paper pencil testing to keep that in mind. If they got an entire 2 points, they would have to get correct responses for both part A and B of the question. They would only get 1 point if they got the correct response for part A, but didn't answer part B correctly, and they wouldn't get any points if they had incorrect responses for both parts or an incorrect response for part A. So, and field test questions do not count in the total score. So, the screen that you're seeing now it's a sample of an answer sheet that was created by Kirsten Fugelseth from Northwest Service Co-op. Thankful that she shared them. The templates for these answer sheets can be found on the Minnesota ABEassessment.com site. And then if you want the answer keys that were developed by Northwest Service Co-op, you'd need to mail Marty Olson at the email that is in the slide also. So we're going to do a little test now to see how well everyone knows how to use the locators, because when you're scoring locators that are delivered and folks are assigning correct pretest levels and subject, the best practice of assigning a level should be based on the number correct for each subject an individual is getting tested in. So when or if a student scores less than 6 on the locator, it might indicate that the level L test should be administered. But you should use any previous information on the examinee's performance to determine the post-test. So the next little test is we're going to use this, and we're going to check and see folks' understanding of using the locator. So we have Sandra, and she got 10 correct on a reading test. What pre-test should be administered? And if you could put your answer in the chat, we'll see how many folks get that right. So just make sure you're looking at whichever subject is being tested. We do. We got a whole bunch of M's. Awesome. Okay. So now Jamal got 6 correct on his math test. What pre-test should he be administered? We got M's again. Correct. So Nellie got 8 correct on her language test, and she should be administered what level with language? M's across the board. Okay, so now the next one, we have Richard. Richard got 12 correct on his reading test. What level of test should he be administered in reading? We have D. Awesome. Okay. Andrea got 11 correct on her language. Which pretest? Another D. Awesome. Now we have Molly. Whoops, I gave you the answer. Whoops, Molly got 13 correct on her math. Which pretest should be administered? A. A is the right answer. I don't know how many folks are having folks in their agencies taking A tests, not super common in Metro North. But yeah, it's very interesting. So, all right, so can we use a score that isn't in the invalid range with TABE? Well, technically there aren't any not valid scores with anything with TABE 1112. But there are results that don't provide a scaled score. So if a test taker doesn't get enough correct, the score guide will not provide a scaled score. So it'll either say N/A or O/R, which means out of range on levels M, D, and A. That's not the case with level E. Level E test in any subject will provide a scaled score. But when a number correct score is too high, the scaled score is given either a plus sign or but the scaled score number will not increase. Whenever a scaled score falls into a high or low range, it would be wise to retest during enrollment. We want them to score in the high range after they've been in classes for a bit on the same level, same subject, when that's the case. So the chart that you see now, the slide, is a score guide booklet. What you're seeing is a sample reading level M page, and it's going to show the information that's on the low end. You can see that a student would technically need to get at least 8 correct in order to get a scaled score populated on an individual test. When it doesn't provide a scaled score, if there was one, you should potentially move that student down to a different, like the E level test for reading, because the M level content was too difficult for them. However, even if a scaled score shows a minus or a plus sign, that scale can still be recorded into SID. So under 7 correct on this test and subject, it won't provide a scaled score, but you can, yeah. They have to get at least 8 correct in order to do that. So let's go to the next slide. Oh, one other comparison thing. It's nice to have the Form 11 and Form 12 information on one page, because in that case, you can see if a student got 11 correct on their Form 11 M reading test, you can see how their scaled score increases if they get 11 correct on a Form 12, because it's the same content range and the same test, but their scaled score does increase. All right.
Linda, you've got 15 minutes left.
15 minutes. Okay, thank you. I think I have about 12 to 15 slides. Okay, thank you, Marty. This chart up here is the high end of, again, the reading level M test. Whenever a student gets 39 correct on this level test, they do need to move to the next level test the next time that they are tested. So should consider retesting with a higher form if they receive that test score on a enrollment test. Those test scores as well, though, can be recorded in SID. And like I said earlier, you can see the increase of the scaled score based on the number correct with Form 11 versus Form 12. So, all right. This slide is a good visual. I provided this to different workforce center counselors in the Anoka County area when they've been asked what content is on each level test. And this is out on the tabetest.com site, but it shows the different subjects that are covered across all levels versus an individual level of tests. As you can see from the math, geometry is covered at all 5 levels of TABE, as are the standards for mathematical practice. They're covered across all of the levels, So what do we know about how many reading passages are on the TABE tests? The reading, as the test level increases, the reading passages increase also. We were advised by DRC staff that the number of passages for 13-14 will be provided in future trainings once the new information is released to the public. With the reading test, there's 47 test items at each test level, and students take approximately 3 minutes per question to answer them. But all of the 11-12 tests are aligned with the CCR standards. Texts are from a broad range of disciplines. And then parts 1 and parts 2 can be administered at different times. Just always make sure that you have the student finish both parts before they leave your program, because you're not going to get a scale score if you do not allow them to finish both parts of the reading test. The information on this slide are the score ranges that are found in SID. We've been told that the 13-14 scaled score ranges are not going to change based on the level. So all of this information was built into SID and the valid ranges that are found in SID for each specific subject too. So this is new information that I'm going to share. We were just provided with this about 2 weeks ago with regard to grade level range and content for tests. There was a grade range document that had been shared with TABE representatives back in 2019, and they indicated that that document is no longer valid. The scores that are found here are attached to the grade ranges now. So again, this is new information. They're based on the review of data from HSE performance, from Lexile and quantile norming, and they're aligned to the college and career readiness standards. There's not a document out on the tabetest.com site for this yet, but they do plan to publish this once their marketing team has corrected the formatting on this information. So there's lots of different resources out on the tabetest.com site with regard to content that is in each subject, in each level, in each test. So you can see where the emphasis is on the standards and the CCR standards. So if it's a low indicator, it's going to indicate that. If it's a high emphasis, there's going to be more questions in that content area. But these are all attached to the anchors that are associated with the college and career readiness standards. So they're free. If your agency allows you to print colored copies, I would ask, and I would do that. Very helpful documents, but it helps to analyze all the information and look at it of what the primary focus is on the test level it is that you're working with your learners. All right. TABE Online has some different samples of reports that they can provide you feedback in proficiency, non-proficiency, partial proficiency in on any test in any subject that has been administered to a student. So if this is something that you're interested in, contact whoever is doing TABE Online in your agency who has access to be able to populate these reports for you. They currently cannot be printed by class, but they can be printed for each individual student so you can diagnose where the focus needs to be on the instruction. And then this is a page number 2 of the online diagnostic for that individual. However, there's some great resources that folks here in Minnesota have shared with the training team too, that you can do some manual checklists to look at what needs to be addressed and what content needs to be addressed with students. And those can all be downloaded off of the Minnesota ABE assessment website under the TABE section. The first document, I believe, is the math checklist. Second document here is the reading checklist. Need to give credit to Northwest Service Co-op folks again who developed these and shared them several years ago. So thinking about post-testing questions, we all need to remember that when can we post-test? Students have to have at least 40 hours of attendance recorded in SID since their pre-test was administered before you can administer post-test, unless if they qualify for the MDE 40-hour waiver. And in this slide, there's a help link if your students potentially qualify. How do you know what post-test to give? Well, if a pre-test score was in the low to middle range of the test level, you should use the opposite form in the same level, same subject. If the pre-test score was in the upper range of the level, you should check to ensure that the student can get a level gain or an MSG in that same level. And if they can, then you should administer the opposite form of the same level. But if the pre-test score was in the upper range and there's no possibility of increasing their scaled score, you should move them up to the next higher level test in that subject as a post-test. So if your program has not purchased online tests or paper tests, this slide shows all of the prices associated with purchasing them. The prices are effective as of January 1 of this year. So the left side shows the online costs and the right side shows the paper pencil costs and all of the different items that you need. And again, like I stated earlier, if you're considering using TABE Online whatsoever, just take into consideration how many tests you're going to administer over the course of the year before you make that purchase. So what do you do if you find old tests? If you find 7 and 8 or 9 and 10 tests in your classroom at your site or at your agency, please shred them, put them in confidential recycling, or destroy them. They're not to be used for instructional purposes. And what do you need to know about level gains? All ABE staff in Minnesota working in a state-funded program need to understand what their role is for achieving level gains for their class, their site, and their program, because every ABE staff in Minnesota needs to strive towards establishing consistent, regular post-testing practices locally to contribute towards the level gains and the MSGs that are part of the state of Minnesota's annual submission to the federal government. And with that being said, our targets this year are at 36.7, and last year they were 28. So just be taking that into consideration. Ask your data manager what you can do to help achieve those targets, and look at establishing consistent practices for learner enrollment and testing. Attempt to test in more than one subject during enrollment, depending on the type of programming that you're offered, and set up regular routine post-testing processes at your site and in your agency. Look at the amount of programming that you have each week, and then build that post-testing routine around how often and when students can reach that 40-hour mark. So that being said, here's the NRS performance targets for 2024 to 2026. There's also a link in the materials to this doc, but you can also find this out on the mnabe.org website. And the slides here, the next two slides, are a document that it's not published and it's not official, but there were folks in different agencies in Minnesota that were looking at how does the CCR grade equivalence associate to the NRS ABE levels, and how do they associate with the TABE and the CASAS goals series. Marty, thank you for taking the time to go through these and provide this information. Again, it's not an official document, but it gives a good indicator of looking across all of the levels and the test levels and the publishers too. the slide that you see here is the reading scores. The next slide is the math scores. And if you're interested in getting those, we can also add like those documents to the presentation materials that are available too if you want them. I know I just embedded screenshots here. Okay. All right, so
5 minutes left, Linda.
Pardon me?
We have 5 minutes left in the
5
session.
minutes left, okay. This is a really fun activity, but I don't think that we're gonna have time because there's other information that I have to cover, but this was a fun little, just a quiz to think about when can you refer, or when should you refer students to any kind of testing that they need. You know, many times students land at your door, but there's always screening questions that you should be thinking about to ask them to determine if they should be getting STEPS testing or if they should be getting TABE or CASA schools testing. So, so if you want the answers for that, I can provide that after today's session, but I'm going to move to the next slide because if you were late arriving, we just want to make sure that you put in your full name, first and last, in the chat, the agency or the program that you currently work with, your current role within that agency, and then your work email address. And I'll be downloading a list of everybody who was in today's session, but just put in the chat too if you need CEUs for having attended today's session. And then something else that is relatively new that many folks were not doing until the last few years, but if you attended today's training, you can add this TABE recertification training to your staff history in the training tab. If you have admin access to TABE, you can, or to SID, you can do this yourself. If you do not have admin access, you need to ask your data manager to make sure that they record the information in your staff history that you attended today. So I did add this too, but if you need CEUs, just make sure you put it in the chat and I can send those to you. If you don't already have TABE 1112 added to your testing list, or you want to customize the testing that's delivered in your agency, there's a help article through the help desk with SID, and it's found here also. And we are at the end. I wasn't monitoring chat probably as well as I should have, but are there any questions? No questions. I'm going to put my video on. There's a lot of information that's in here. This does not need to be the last time that you ever attend a TABE recertification session, because based on the folks that are in the session, they may provide you additional feedback. So yeah, and these sessions are always free. They're offered at state-sponsored events. They're offered during the support staff conference. They're offered during ABE Summer Institute. And if there are more than 8 individuals in your agency, contact Marty Olson, and we can arrange to potentially do either a in-person or virtual training for your staff.
We are getting a couple questions in the chat.
Okay.
One question, just asking for a reminder after how many hours a student needs to get TABE tested. And that was those 40 hours.
Okay. Yep. The best practice is to test students when they enroll into your program. The state policy is before 12 hours, but a best practice is to test them when they're interested in enrolling with your program. So
There's a question here on, is it more common to use a TABE L or a CASAS test?
our program has used the TABE L. It's not super frequent. That's a very good question. generally, if a student's an English language learner, we will have them take the English to like this CASA STEPS test prior to delivering a TABE L, but if we find that there potentially could be like some type of learning disabilities, and they're struggling with taking a locator in any subject, yeah, then an L would be administered. Yeah, we've used L level, probably a dozen times a year. And it's been with potentially native speakers that may have some type of developmental disability or brain injury. Also, that have struggled and can't take the locator itself, so. All right, there's a Dawn that has a question.
Hi, Linda. Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome.
I just had a question. Is there any like data research if we're testing at 40 hours versus if we're waiting for that 60 or 70? Like, is there any research to say there is a benefit? We're seeing more measurable skills gains if we do wait that a little bit longer?
That might be a SID team question because they could extract the data to like statewide to kind of look at that kind of information. I believe the publishers for 11-12, I believe it's 40 to 60 hours is the recommended post testing. And then the state policy is 40 hours. But different publishers, I mean, it's just different for each publisher. So yeah, the CASAS test used to be 80 to 120 hours of instruction. Like the life and work, I believe, is when students were making gains from that. So did that answer your question?
Perfect. Thank you. Yep.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much, Linda.
Mm-hmm.
We are at time. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. Give folks